On Sunday afternoon, the Carolina Hurricanes have officially made moves as we are now down to 25 players. Who made it and who still has a fighting chance to make the final 23-man roster? That and much more on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers. I also do a column on the Chicago Wolves called Wolves Weekly, which will be starting here very, very soon, as their first game is on October 12th against the Milwaukee Admirals. I'm the co-host of the Surge Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. If you're on the YouTube version, you can see I'm in a different background, as I am on vacation in Palm Springs for the week, hanging out with family. But duty does call, and we are still going to be doing some podcasting this week and doing some episodes, and got a really great guest list coming up over the next couple of days, talking about the Chicago Wolves and all of that good stuff. But in terms of today's episode, we get to talk about the initial cuts that the Carolina Hurricanes have made, as we are now down to 25 players left on their post-camp roster. Also going to give my initial thoughts on who got cut, where they are going in terms of the AHL and also across the world. And also we get some new signings as well, as Skyler, Brind'Amour, and Bryce Montgomery locked up some new contracts over the weekend. But before we jump into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's like I said, the Carolina Hurricanes on Sunday afternoon made the initial roster cuts, which we all think was probably going to happen after their last two preseason games. That was on Friday against the Tampa Bay Lightning and then on Saturday against Nashville Predators. And it's, the Hurricanes hitting on a high note, winning both of those games. And we all kind of thought, with the fact that the team was off on Sunday before they start their initial last 14 practices over the next few days between Monday and Thursday, you kind of thought, okay, Sunday might be one of those things where it'll be a good time to do the roster cuts, take care of all of those, and send reassign the guys who need to probably go to Chicago in the AHL with the Wolves. Maybe some guys go back overseas, take care of some PTO contracts because, Sam Gagner and Rocco Grimaldi, and just see what the Hurricanes are going to do in terms of just all of that. And so, of course, we finally did get that in the afternoon, and looking from the roster is almost initially 50 players deep. Now we are down to 25. So the guys who are going to Chicago for the Chicago list, which we kind of knew was going to happen at some point. Skyler, Brind'Amour was one of those guys. Noel Gunler, who I think had a really great camp overall, going to the rookie showcase, does get 5 points unofficially. Did lead the team with a goal and 4 assists, along with Greb Cherkasov, who Gleb was one of the other guys as well. Juha Jaska, Bradley Nadeau, Justin Robidas, and Felix Unger-Storm. Robidas was someone I said to keep an eye on because he was one of my 3 under-the-radar guys going into the rookie showcase, and he did very, very well. Then, of course, for defensemen, you got Dominic Fensor, Alexei Himosalmi, Charles Alexis Legault, Scott Morrow, and Ronan Seeley. And Ronan Seeley was another one of those guys that I said to keep an eye on going to the rookie showcase, and he was the captain of the team, did get a goal, so he did pretty well overall. I thought he had a pretty decent camp, all things considered. In terms of the goalies, Ruslan Kayasev, no surprise there, and then Spencer Martin and Yanov Peretz. So initially looking at, those guys, you're kind of, it's not surprising of who got sent down and all of that in terms of the Chicago. Now, in terms of other moves going to other places, Anthony Honka did get loaned to HC Ajo in the Swiss League. So he's the only guy who's going overseas out of all of the prospects and PTO cuts and stuff like that. So a lot of the guys, so we had 15 players go to Chicago outright. Honka's going to the Swiss League. And then released from PTO contracts was Sam Gagner and Rocco Grimaldi. Now, Sam Gagner did get 2 goals over the weekend in the same game. It was against Nashville. So I'm curious to see if the Hurricanes maybe give him a contract, or it's just one of those things that, hey, thanks for coming out, and hopefully, maybe another team picks him up. I thought Sam Gagner did a good job. And Rocco Grimaldi, all things considered, did pretty decently himself. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we hear something soon of like maybe the Chicago Wolves just outright sign him, because he was with the team last year when he did a really great job, over 50 points. And I guess he's someone that Chicago would love to have back on their roster again, especially with the fact that you have all the new prospects, that are coming down, and to have a veteran leadership like Rocco, I think it would best fit for the Wolves. So hopefully, we get to hear some news soon from the Wolves, and hopefully get Grimaldi onto the team and then placed on waivers for the purpose of being assigned to Chicago. Of course, it was one of those things where not, some guys have to go through waivers, and that's Josiah Slavin, Ty Smith, and Ryan Suzuki. I doubt those three guys are going to get picked up by any team unless someone really wants to take an itch at one of them, and maybe it's Ty Smith out of those three. But those are the three guys who are going to be just outright going through waivers down in Chicago. Of course, you got your PTO guys, but the main thing was just your 15 outright players going from camp in Raleigh and heading down to the Chicago Bulls. Like I said, you got Brind'Amour, Gunler, Yaska, Nadeau, Robota, Cherkasov, Unger, Sorum, and then for defense, Finsori, Himosalmi, Legault, Morrow, and Sealy, and then for goaltenders, Kayasev, Martin, and Yanov Peretz. Now, when you go through those names, you kind of are like, wait a minute, there's some names here that didn't get mentioned. And yes, the guys who made it through the initial first cuts going into the 25-man roster into the start of the week. Now, you got Tyson Jost, who made it on there. He's number 27. Joachim Ryan, who's 33, one of the defensemen. He did make it onto the initial list. And then you got Eric Robinson, Jackson Blake, Riley Stillman, Bryce Montgomery as well. And those are kind of the guys that have made it onto the 25-man group with 23 skaters and your two goaltenders. Now, with Riley Stillman, he wasn't in a yellow no-contact jersey for most of camp. I'm curious to see what the Hurricanes are going to do here, because if you really look at the initial grouping, you got Gostisbehere, Chatfield, Orlov, and Burns. There's your four defense. There's four of your defensemen right there, all kind of grouped together. Then you got Sean Walker, and then you go down and you get Jacob Slavin. Now there's your initial six. Now, if you're talking Riley Stillman and Bryce Montgomery, whether it's 8 and Joachim Ryan makes 9. I don't see the Hurricanes bringing that many defensemen, all things considered. So I would say maybe you're going to, if you have to look at the Hurricanes, maybe bringing 8. I would definitely see them more going with 7. It's just, who's that 7th? Is it Joachim Ryan? Does Bryce Montgomery make a name for himself into being that? Or is it Riley Stillman, who's mainly been in the yellow contact jersey? So those are kind of the big names that kind of show out in terms of who's made it on the roster so far. But, we'll talk a little bit more of that going into the second segment of just the initial thoughts overall. But that's kind of the names that you're kind of seeing out from, when you look at the cuts that are initially made and who's actually on the 25-man roster. It's very interesting to see that, because you're waiting for it all at camp, because I know everyone was kind of wondering, okay, when the Hurricanes are going to make a move, because there's a lot of teams that were already sending guys all parts of last week. And the big thing that was mainly happening is the fact that the Hurricanes were waiting for stuff to get taken care of in Chicago, trying to get all the guys settled in for where they're going to practice and stuff like that, lodging and all that. And they want to make it a seamless transition for the guys who are going from the main Hurricanes camp to AHL camp for the rest of the week. So they want to make it a smooth transition as possible. And luckily, like I said, with it being an off day on Sunday for everyone, it just made the most sense to do it on a day where they're off, and then they have to worry about, okay, we have a game today. Who are we sitting down? Who we got to get travel plans for and stuff like that. No, it's just, hey, it's Sunday. Nothing's going on. Let's just take care of all of our moves now and get the guys to go where they need to be. And that was the case, and that's what we saw on Sunday afternoon. And now that the Chicago Wolves just got injected with 15 more players. A couple PTO guys got released. Hopefully, it works out for them somewhere else. Hopefully, for me, I hope Rocco Grimaldi at least making it to Chicago, because he'd be another great addition to the Wolves. And then, of course, you get your 3 guys that are going waivers who are probably going to be in Chicago as well. So all in all, you're looking at 18 guys that are going to be going to the Chicago Wolves. all things considered. So you really got a really heavy group of guys that the Chicago Wolves are going to love to have right now with the fact that you just look at with who they have. So they're going to be a very loaded terms of an AHL squad with all the guys that are going down very, very soon. But those are the initial roster cuts as we've seen, went through all of them and stuff like that. If you want to go check it out, Walt Ruff did tweet out the initial roster, the guys who are going to get reassigned. You also can check that on Hurricanes.com as well. But stick around as I'll give my initial thoughts on the post-camp roster. So make sure to stick around for that as I'll talk about that here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need a hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Now, one good thing I like about Indeed is the fact that you're able to upload your resume, put all your certificates, you've got classifications and all that on there, and that way it helps set you up for what you're looking for in terms of a job that you want. But if you're an employer, well, if you leverage over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day with Indeed, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Once again, that is Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? Well, you need Indeed. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Just like I said at the end of segment 1, kind of give my initial thoughts on looking at the 25-man roster after all the cuts that the Hurricanes made on Sunday afternoon. And looking at it overall, I'm not really surprised when you look at guys like Bradley Nadeau and Felix Unger-Storm kind of being sent down to Chicago after having so I would think they had pretty some decent overall camps. But if you look at those two guys specifically, you're going into a situation where one guy's coming off a freshman year at the University of Maine who did really well, set a lot of numbers that the guys said the team hasn't seen since the mid-2000s. And if you're looking at, Felix Unger-Storm, it's his first professional season over in North America, came over from the SHL. And he almost the entirety of camp, they had him playing center, which isn't something that he's used to. So I think it's a good situation if Felix Unger-Storm is to keep learning the craft of being a center and doing that in Chicago with the Wolves, and you're not thrown into the lion's den of, okay, you're in the Metro, you got to deal with probably like guys like Dylan Strome and Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby. It's just one of those things where you don't really want to set yourself up to be in a bad spot where you're like going against Mika Zibanejad. So it's good to do in Chicago. You kind of can figure it out from there. And, maybe he keeps building on his, repertoire as being a center. And that's kind of something that the Hurricanes wanted him to do. So I could see why they did that in case of, hey, he's been playing center for most of camp. He isn't really truly ready yet. Let's see what he does. And that's kind of the case with him. And the same with Bradley Nadeau. Like I said, Nadeau's coming off of his first, where you're coming off as a freshman in college. Yes, you played a couple games last year, but it's one of those things where it's better to have your first full pro season in Chicago with Cam Abbott, who's really known to train guys like Moritz Seider and Niles Hoglander and all of them. But it's good to be able to do that and be in that situation. Like going back to Unger-Storm real quick, the Hurricanes are pretty short at center, all things considered. When you look at the non-main roster, you got Ryan Suzuki and Josiah Slavin, who are your kind of true centers. That's one of those things where I see why, if the Hurricanes want to keep using Unger-Storm, there's someone that they could really use to try and learn up and maybe add to the depth of the center group. And that's the same thing with Skyler Brind'Amour, which we'll talk about in segment 3 of, how adding him kind of bolsters the center group. and stuff like that. But then you look at the other, forwards. I mean, it's not surprising, Noah Gunler had to deal with some injuries last season, but overall had a really great camp and preseason. I think he's kind of risen himself up on the roster in terms of the depth chart. Gleb Cherkasov, no surprise how great he did as well. It's just one of those, those two guys have really shown out, and just with how the wings are set up right now. I think it's kind of hard for one or more of those guys to kind of break into the roster in terms of where you're looking at for the wings. But, it's good to have, them go to Chicago, learn as well, especially Gleb's first full pro season in North America. And then, with Justin Robidoux, I'm really excited to see what he can do. He played in the ECHL last year. I think he should have played in the American, but it just didn't work out for him. But I'm excited to see what he can do in his first full season in the AHL. Defenseman, not really surprised with any of these guys as well. A lot of them played in, various leagues in the AHL last year outside of Scott Morrow, who, finished off a season at UMass, played really well. Just unfortunately, camp didn't really go his way. He was mainly out for most of it with an undisclosed injury. So he did get into the final last two preseason games, but I can see why the Hurricanes don't really want to rush him right out the gate, and especially with the fact that he only played in two preseason games, and they were the last two. And plus, when you look at the overall depth chart of the defense, Scott Morrow is someone you want to have in the AHL clocking top two, like that first D pair minutes. Because if he's in Carolina, who's he going to kick out of Slavin Burns, Orlov Chatfield, Ghost, and Walker? I just don't see Morrow doing it to any of those guys, and that's why it makes the most sense to have him go to Chicago, still try to get fully healthy and just log 25 minutes a game with the Chicago Wolves and just keep getting ready for next year. Because we know that, Orlov and Burns' contract comes off the books. Alexander Nikishin's supposed to come over, and that's probably a good chance for Scott Morrow to assert himself into that group of six in terms of defense. So it's not really a surprise why they wouldn't send him down there, since, like I said, he missed most of camp. And just right now, it's better to have him down there in the American, getting top numbers in first D pair instead of having him be like a seventh D man where he's not really doing anything. Ronan Seeley, I thought he did a really good job as well. Just one of those things where, hey, just go back to the American, have a season with the high end prospects, guys that you kind of know who's going to be there and stuff like that. And, you saw the struggle of last year when they went independent. Now you have a full roster of guys that are Hurricanes prospects. Really can't go wrong with that. Goaltending, like I said, not really surprised either, because you out of Perez played in the ECHL last year. He's going to probably get a chance in the American. He got, of course, got Ruslan Kaisev, who looked pretty decent, all things considered. And then, of course, you got your number 3 goalie in Spencer Martin, which he did really good for the Hurricanes last year. Good to have a veteran presence in the net for the Wolves. I think he's going to do very well for them as well. And let me tell you, that Darth Vader all black kit that he was wearing at practice last week, very awesome to see in person, so much better. And I'm excited to see what he can do with the Wolves. It's one of those things where, I know he prefers to be in the NHL, but just being able to stay with the organization, get to the waivers that earlier this week, and still be able to be part of the Hurricanes in general, I think is really good to see. And I think he's a really good guy to have in case something happens with Freddie Anderson or Peter Chekhov. Now, knock on wood, nothing happens. But, just with the history of Freddie Anderson staying healthy, it's good to have a third goaltender to have just in case, because a lot of teams would love to have a third. Even some would love to have a second. And I think keeping Spencer Martin, having him in Chicago, it's a nice safety net for the Canes in case anything happens. So you have 3 dependable goalies that you can lean on throughout the season. Looking at the rest of the group as well, Anthony Honka, he scored a goal, did well in camp, but it's good to see him get a chance to play some huge minutes. And I think he's going to probably see more of that over in Switzerland, just because you look at the defensemen who are already heading down to Chicago, guys who are possibly on their way as well. And then, of course, the depth invites that the Wolves had on their initial roster as well. Sam Gagner and Rocco Grimaldi, hope everything works out for them. Like I said, I would love to see Rocco make the Chicago Wolves roster. I think he'd be someone they would really need to have. Josiah Slavin, like I mentioned, could be a second or third line center for the Wolves, with Suzuki, coming in probably as one of their top guys. And of course, Skyler Brind'Amour got his new contract and stuff like that too. So it's going to be a lot of interesting aspects of how that's going to work out in terms of Josiah Slavin possibly being center. Ty Smith, another defenseman that's going to come with the rest of those guys, so that'll be fun to see what he can do. And like I said, Brian Suzuki, one of the centers that's going to be in the mix of that entire group for the Carolina Hurricanes. But overall, not a bad 25. Those are the guys that are going. The 25-man roster, yeah, you got Bryce Montgomery. He just signed a contract, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But then Joakim Ryan, he played with the Hurricanes for a little bit, come back. I'm curious to see who's going to be the 7th D-man. Of course, Riley Stillman's still up there too, but he was in a no contact. Wondering how that's going to play out in terms of the Hurricanes. But Jackson Blake's up there as well. I know some people are saying because of having to send some guys down through waivers, they didn't really want to do that with, that's why they kept Jackson Blake up. And I'm wondering if he's still one of those guys that while he did initially made the 25-man post first cuts, does he stick on it? Maybe not. He had a great camp. Let's be honest. He stood out amongst a lot of those guys. And, but Rod said, it's one of those things where he has to, who's he going to replace? And I would love to see him kind of etch his way into the top 6, maybe his top 9, maybe 4th line. But as of right now, yeah, he made the initial first cuts, but does he make it to the 23-man roster come Friday? Who really knows? It'll be very interesting to see, but of course you got all your other regulars, no real surprise of those guys. Like you say, you got Jost, you got Robinson, kind of one of the other guys who came in to see what they can do. So it's just, a lot of the same names. Got some new guys coming in. Of course, William Carey, he's on a long-term contract. Just Joseph Robinson kind of sticking themselves out there. And of course, what's going to happen with Blake, Stillman, and Montgomery. So there's going to be a lot to be seen for the initial 25-man roster. But all in all, not upset about it. You're not really surprised by some of the moves that were made by the Carolina Hurricanes. But in terms of guys who did or did not get moved, and of course, there's some guys who did get some contracts over the weekend. We're going to talk about that here in a second with Skyler, Brind'Amour, and Bryce Montgomery, how they are going to be at least part of the organization, at least through this year, but one of them got a longer contract. So make sure to stick around, as I'll talk about that here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Where can you do that? Well, you can do that at FanDuel.com. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So at the end of segment 2, we're talking about how we're going to be talking about Skyler, Brind'Amour, and Bryce Montgomery, how they both got contracts with the Carolina Hurricanes over the weekend. Now, with Skyler Brind'Amour, his came right after the Nashville Predators game where he signed a 1-year, 2-way contract with the Hurricanes. They'll pay him $775,000 in the NHL and $75,000 in the AHL. And Eric Tulsky, GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, said, "We were impressed with Skyler's defensive awareness last season in the AHL, and he followed that up with a strong preseason showing. We're excited to have him in our organization." Now, last year, he did play with the Charlotte Checkers in the 23-24 season, getting 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points in 54 games. Of course, we all know that he was a national championship with Quinnipiac back in the 22-23 season, where he was actually named the ECAC Best Defensive Forward and was an ECAC third All-Star with 32 points in 41 games back in his last year with Quinnipiac, 14 goals and 18 assists. Now, Raleigh native, son of legend Rod Brind'Amour, and you can really tell by how his game plays. He almost is like a younger version. Basically, he's like Rod 2.0. You all know he's his dad. Outside of the name and stuff like that, his game almost matches Rod's. Really good in the face-offs, really good in the defensive zones, plays a more defensive-heavy type of game. And that's where you can see, he'll score goals. Rod scored goals, Skyler does as well. But you can definitely see where Skyler really matches his dad's playing style, and I think that's why the Hurricanes really loved what they saw. Of course, this was after, because he came into camp on a PTO after mutually terminating his contract with the Charlotte Checkers, because That was a 2-year deal. That was just with Charlotte. He wasn't an affiliated player with the Florida Panthers, so he was technically just a guy who had an AHL contract, but terminated it, came to Carolina as a PTO. Now he got a one-year, 2-way deal, which is great to see. And, of course, he will be a restricted free agent by the time of the end of that contract, when he's 25, 26. So that's not a real surprise. So it's good to see him still sticking with the team. Overall, low risk. Hopefully a good reward comes out of it. Like I said, you're adding a defensive center in Brind'Amour, which helps out with the, like I said, with the initial depth, where all you had was really Ryan Suzuki and Josiah Slavin. But now you have Skyler Brind'Amour, who can be able to take faceoffs in the defensive zone, play some special teams, and especially on the PK, because I saw that I was able to cover him a little bit with the Charlotte Checkers, and he did stand out in terms of how good his defensive side of the game is. And, of course, he just kept going up at it as well. And it helps when you're at camp and your dad is the head coach and teaches you guys how to do faceoffs and play a defensive structure to the game. So I think being able to do that and then go to the AHL where Cam Abbott's probably going to run the same thing, I think that's only going to help Skyler more. And hopefully you're at a point where maybe he gets a 2-3 year deal that kind of sees him go, have a 2-way on top of that. But that'll be great to see if that all works out. But it's good to see Skyler sticking with the organization. And now we have at Brind'Amour back with the Hurricanes system rather than be in Chicago. But it's good to see that at least Skyler made it. And, hopefully it works out for him down in Chicago. Now, one of the other guys that was in the midst of all the news that was going on, Bryce Montgomery was originally 170th overall pick in the 2011 draft by the Carolina Hurricanes. He signed his 3-year his entry-level contract, or his ELC, which will earn $854,910 in the NHL level per season, or $55,000 in the American League. And Eric Tulsi, he said, Bryce is a strong defenseman who skates well. We look forward to seeing him continue to develop in our system. So it's good to see that the 121st overall pick back in 2011 signed with the team. Spent most of the last year with the South Carolina Stingrays of the ECHL, getting 12 points, 4 goals, 8 assists in 42 games. He's a very big kid, 6'4", 215. Spent 3 seasons in the Ontario Hockey League with the London Knights. He did only manage to put up 8 points in 84 games, but he's someone who is really defensively minded and is very, very strong and is built. So initially he's on the 25-man roster coming out of the initial cuts. I don't know if he's going to be on the main roster coming opening night, but it's good to see the fact that he's really played himself into a good preseason to where he earned a contract with the Hurricanes, and he's got his ELC now clicking in. So it's good to see. It's going to be interesting to see how he does. I'm excited to see what he can do. And, he's got the big body. He knows how to transition well, knows how to play physical. He's not someone who's going to lay at the world, but he's going to give you that guy who's going to bring that physicality and know how to use his 6'4", 6'5" body and do that well. So, even with all the roster cuts that are going on over the weekend, the Hurricanes, being able to lock up Skyler and Bryce, it goes to show that, a lot of guys are going to get reassigned to certain cities and stuff like that, or, some guys are still sticking with the main roster going into the last, 4 days of practice before you roll into the regular season. Either way, it's good that the organization's adding some more depth in certain areas, and it'll be fun to see what the Hurricanes can do with Skyler and Bryce, either in Raleigh or in Chicago, and all of that. But that will wrap up a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. If you want to keep everything that's going on with me, I'm at OneShireZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. There's a link to my bio where you can check out all of my articles at the Hockey Writers, or just go to thehockeywriters.com where you can find all my Carolina Hurricanes articles along with my upcoming Chicago Wolves column called Wolves Weekly. If you want to check out my other podcast, The Surgecast, you can go look that up on all podcast platforms, on YouTube at The Surgecast. And the same thing for this show as well. You can just look up Locked On Hurricanes on all podcast platforms. Leave a 5-star rating and review, because if you do, I might just read on the show. And on the YouTube side of things, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show, hit the thumbs up button. Let me know if you like the show as well. Share with all other Caniacs, because we want them to become everydayers just like you. Because we are at 997 subscribers. We were 3 away from 1,000. And that is really awesome because we hit 1,000. I might just do some special for you guys. But before I let you go, thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of the day. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. But I hope everyone enjoyed the Monday episode of Locked On Hurricanes. Hope everyone enjoys their Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.